Thank you for joining us for today's Research at Home webinar. We're very pleased to have Dr. Jeff Kelly and his colleagues to give their presentation today. So just a little bit of a bio for Jeff. He's a George Lynn Cross Professor in the Department of Biology and the Corix Chair in Environmental Sustainability at OU. He received a bachelor's degree in wildlife management from the University of Maine, a master's degree in zoology from Oklahoma State University, and a PhD in biology from Colorado State University. Jeff is also the PI of a NSF research training grant and runs a program based on the topic of aeroecology, in which he has established a new model for interdisciplinary graduate student training that's focused on understanding ecological patterns and processes in the lower atmosphere. Jeff teaches interdisciplinary graduate courses, particularly in the Earth Observation Science for Society and Sustainability graduate certificate program. And this is part of the NSF-funded NRT program. He also teaches courses in conservation and population ecology. His research has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the USDA, and Department of Energy. And one of the core motivating factors in his research is how human impacts on the atmosphere are changing life in the air, hence the term aeroecology. For today's seminar, though, Jeff and his team were awarded a seed grant from the Office of the VPRP in our competition based on inequities in the research enterprise. And so for today's seminar, they're going to focus their talk on computing in modern biology, workshops for broadening participation in the STEM fields. So thank you, Jeff and Ed and Sarah, for being here. We look forward to your talk.
Thanks, Anne. Appreciate that introduction. Also, really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk about these workshops and workshop ideas. So, co-PIs on this project, in addition to me and Ed and Sarah, are Haley Lanier, Katie Marsky, and Laura Stein from the Department of Biology. And the way we sort of got to the point of applying for the Inequities in Research Seed Funding program that the VPRP put out was because we're very fortunate in biology to have a group of graduate students that are very passionate about these issues and have led both the development of SIC, the STEM Inclusion Council, but also are interested in training and students, including students in the biological sciences and trying to increase diversity and inclusion. So we're fortunate in biology to be working with this group, and they sort of led us to this point where we applied for these funds and ran the workshops and collected the results that we're going to show you today. Ed, can I have the next slide? So I think we're all aware that the training of students, particularly in the STEM disciplines, is sort of in a crisis situation now. And trying to deal with that is a national issue. Certainly the National Science Foundation and the National Science Board in their Vision 2030 report put out this key question about how we can increase STEM skills and opportunities for all Americans. And this may seem like a generic question, but I think there's some intentional language here around STEM skills, right, as a particular focus, and all Americans, right? And I think that those are the things that we're talking about and trying to address in these workshops. Next slide. This is just an image of a report from the done in the Obama administration that indicates that this sort of training is a problem because students are not showing up prepared, right? So on the right-hand side of this slide, we see that white students, as well as Black and Latinx students, enroll in STEM majors in about the same percentages, right? But we have attrition from those enrollments. And importantly, attrition among Black and Latinx students is higher than it is among the STEM than it is among white students. So 43%, which is still a low percentage, 43% of white students that enroll in STEM majors become STEM graduates, but those percentages are much lower. And this speaks to what we think of as sort of two major issues, right? One is preparedness for these degrees, right? And these degree tracks in terms of technical skills, but also the sense of community. You know, are Black and Latinx students seeing a pathway to these degrees and to these professions? And these are two things that we hope to address in the workshops that we're offering. Next slide. And beyond, so that was talking about STEM graduates, but we also think about these issues more broadly for the skilled technical workforce, right? And this is just a National Science Board publication on the skilled technical workforce. And so here what we're thinking about is, like, for many professions broadly beyond STEM, in arts and humanities, and biomedical area, you need technical skills, and we're not providing adequately those technical skills, and our students aren't adequately prepared to learn those technical skills. And so we need to provide a bridge to help them engage in those ways. And that's what, one of the things we hope to do here. Next slide, Ed. And so again, we worked with the STEM Inclusion Council, which and Ed is a representative of the STEM Inclusion Council, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about how we structured the workshop, how it was offered, and the results that came out of it. So I'm just going to turn it over to Ed at this point.
Thanks, Jeff. So to sort of talk about the STEM Inclusion Council, it was started in 2017 by graduate students within the biology department. And we are a community of diverse graduate students who understand the importance of feeling a sense of belonging in a STEM community that is representative and celebrates diversity. So SICK partnered with a team of graduate students from Miami University to take on this computer science workshop. Our workshop students interacted directly with graduate students who have experienced being a member of a marginalized community in STEM, who have experienced the pipeline into STEM, and who recognize that instead the importance of pathways into biology regardless of the stage of your career. And so I'm going to be talking a lot about biology because that's where a lot of our members' expertise lies, but these concepts really apply to the greater STEM ecosystem. And so as our team developed this workshop, we had three main goals to address the needs of our community. And so the first one was that we have to make STEM and coding accessible if we want to increase the participation and retention of underrepresented students. So students from marginalized communities are much less likely to have access to or knowledge of the resources that they need to be successful in biology. So we took accessibility of these workshops into account. And so this year we went virtual because of the pandemic. And so virtual does have its limits. You need a stable internet connection and you need access to a computer, but we were still able to serve students across the country and across the world. We had students in China, Puerto Rico, and India. And so while it was very successful this year, we also hope that in the future we can bring students to campus and serve students in the greater Oklahoma area. So we want to show them the college campus. We want to provide transportation, housing, food during the workshop, but no matter what, this workshop has to be free. You can look up these sort of coding camps or coding workshops elsewhere and they cost money. And that sort of limits participation from students without as many resources. So in the future, no matter what we do going forward, it will be a free workshop. And so the second thing that we wanted to keep in mind as we were planning this was we wanted to improve student confidence in coding. So students are going to need computer skills, and coding is how we interpret the enormous amount of data that's being produced in today's world. But coding also can represent a barrier into biology. If you are trying to go into STEM and you feel that you don't have the skills or feel that you should have the skills already, but you somehow don't, you may not proceed to enter into that kind of career. And so our workshop really hopes to empower our students with the confidence and coding ability that will weaken this barrier into STEM. None of the students are going to walk away as an expert in coding, but the fact that we are keeping that in mind as we plan this workshop is a strength. So we designed these curricula to demonstrate coding skills while ensuring that our students increase in confidence. And so then the last thing we wanted to keep in mind is that we wanted to build a community. You can get as many students' feet in the door as you want, but if you don't have a welcoming and helpful community, then you're not going to retain those students. And so we wanted to demonstrate to our students that they belong in and can access that kind of community within OU and within the higher education system across the United States. And so even more than that, students typically come in with a very narrow idea of the breadth of resources and opportunities open to them. And so we wanted to expand our students' idea of what it means to be a biologist and the fact that that idea of a biologist can include them. So that's kind of what we kept in mind as we designed this. And so this is what we actually did. Our 100 students learned to code. Our workshop took place in the second week of August and was a week long. And so during this course, or during this workshop, our students chose from 14 courses taught by biologists using data from those biologist labs. These courses included R and Python, two of the most popular free coding languages used in academia, industry, and government biology careers. So they also had the opportunity to attend seminars on what it means to be part of the biological community. They received resources for the next steps in their careers, and they also met with professionals outside of academia that were immersed in a career in biology. So our students were mostly female. They were 72% female, which is excellent because women are typically highly underrepresented in many fields that require coding and computer skills. So in addition to that, our students were racially and ethnically diverse. This sort of breakdown of race and ethnicity is very representative of Oklahoma. And so by default, it's more representative than STEM projects typically are. However, we are hoping to serve underrepresented communities. And so we're hoping that in future years, our cohorts will be more diverse. Our outreach this year was limited due to the pandemic, and it will be more intentional in future years. So then our students were also more likely to be LGBTQ. According to a 2017 Gallup poll, 4.5% of American adults typically identify as LGBT compared to the 28% of students that we were able to reach here. And so then lastly, our students were economically diverse, and importantly, it included our target audience. Of the students that could speak to their income, about half came in at low income to poor. And so this is important because these are the students that may not have had access to resources that would educate them on coding or what they need to do for the next steps in their career. And so to determine how much of an impact our workshop had, we conducted pre and post surveys where students self-evaluated their own coding skills and confidence. We will be following up with a longer term survey in November. But to show you the results that we have so far, I'll be showing you a series of box plots followed by some evaluations to really demonstrate how our workshop went. So first off, even approaching these kind of coding problems, our students became more confident. So before the workshop, a lot of these students ranked themselves at about a 2 in terms of confidence out of 5. But by the end of the workshop, the average student gave themselves a 4. So just right off the bat, we can tell that our students are more confident just starting these kind of projects. But then our students also became more confident in their ability to code and use these programming, analysis, and visualization softwares. So again, before the workshop, the average student gave themselves a 2 out of 5, but by the end, they were an outlier if they didn't give themselves a 4 out of 5. So our students, by and large, became more confident in their ability to code. And so those questions are a lot more straightforward in terms of confidence in coding, but we wanted to get at some of the nuance in specifically imposter syndrome or feeling like you don't fit in with your peers. And so we asked our students how they compare to their peers in terms of their coding ability. So a 3, if you give yourself your 3, you're about the same as your peers. Anything below means you're worse, and anything above means you're better. Means you think you're better. And so before the workshop, the average student thought they were worse than their peers, or they weren't as prepared as their peers to code. But by the end of the workshop, the average student gave themselves a 3 or higher. So by the end of the workshop, our students definitely recognized that they were on par for the course, regardless of their age group. And so this is exactly what we want. We don't want inflated egos or to discourage our students. We want them to recognize that they're not alone and that they are where they should be. But more than just coding, our workshop was also about showing these students the different pathways that they can take into STEM and biology specifically. So we offered more than just coursework. We also had these lunch seminars. So every day at lunch, students had an hour-long break. And so the first 30 minutes of this break, they could just interact and chat with grad students. And then at the end of this lunch break, we had a 30-minute seminar from a variety of speakers on computers in biology, careers in biology, the history of women in science, and then ending with imposter syndrome. And so students really enjoyed these, and they used this as a resource. After the careers in biology seminar, students had a lot of questions. So the following day, we ended up having that 30-minute chat just where students could ask the grad students to share some of their experiences applying to graduate school. And one of the students, before we even left that room, said that it was the most comfortable she had ever felt about her future in applying to graduate school. So these were definitely an important part of demonstrating to students that they can do it, basically. And so if you'll remember, I did talk about wanting to build this community. And so just by interacting through the coursework and through these lunch seminars, students could interact with students from OU and Miami University. So they got an idea of the breadth of the higher education community. But then we ended this workshop with a career mixer where we brought in biologists in a variety of fields, including federal and local government agencies. We had museum curators, we had policy folks from the National Science Board office, and we had some biotech representatives. So all in all, we had 8 professionals across, again, a very wide field, but they were all biologists. And so students were broken up into small groups, and they did 15-minute rotations with each professional. And included in this, graduate students tagged in as well. So each group included some undergraduate high schools, and we also had graduate students that were volunteering. And so everybody got to talk to each of these 8 professionals, and then we ended it by exchanging contact information. And we actually had students take advantage of that and follow up with some of these representatives and professionals. And I can say from the group that I was in, we had a first-year undergraduate student who started off with a lot of conviction that she was going to be a veterinarian. And by the end, after interacting with all these professionals, she was talking about getting research experience, really expanding her idea and recognizing that she may want to do other things and she's going to try it out. So this was an excellent time. I really enjoyed it, and I think our students did too, as you can see by these quotes. So by the end of the workshop, thanks to the VPRP, we've been able to do a lot so far. Many of these students learned to code for the first time. They became more comfortable approaching coding and became more competent coders. They learned that they were as well prepared as their peers, and they gained resources to combat imposter syndrome. I think very importantly, these students connected with graduate students that were representative of themselves, and they recognized just how many career opportunities there are available if they continue down these paths. And so we did all this in our first year, but we want to do more. And so to talk more about that, I'll hand it back to Jeff.
Thanks, Ed. Right, so we have success in the first year, what we feel like was success, and the instructors felt like this is a valuable exercise for the students and for the instructors. And so then the challenge gets to be, how do you grow and sustain this project, and how do you make it impactful, right? How do you broaden the impact of this? I think on the slide here, you can see the NSF's 10 big ideas. And I think it's a pretty easy argument to say that it dovetails well with the need to do convergence research in terms of training talent that has the skills to do quantitative science. It's clearly a part of harnessing the data revolution, having people who can do the work that is required to harness the data revolution. And it's, right spot on for the future of work, right? How do we have a advancing technical workforce? But in addition to sort of, we think being sort of really strong addition to proposals or standalone proposals at the NSF, it also does some things strategically that are important for the biological sciences at OU and maybe for OU more generally, right? Motivations that we have for doing this include helping those students find a pathway to a STEM career, right? Or a career that involves technical skills. And this is one way to broaden participation in science and to increase diversity, which are goals that we collectively have. Another goal from a faculty perspective, perhaps, is to make our proposals more competitive across the board. Our faculty often struggle with the broader impact section of particularly NSF proposals and how to build and evince a strong broader impact statement. If we have a structure around these workshops that is run year after year, and faculty can contribute to those and add new dimensions onto those, we think that it becomes much easier to have a very strong broader impact statement in any proposal that you might write. And so in that way, and having sort of a university infrastructure for broader impacts, we think that it could be broadly helpful across STEM disciplines. And then not third, but very important issue for us is that this provides really good professional training for the instructors, for graduate students, for postdocs who are working with these students and who are learning to teach coding and who are connecting with diverse groups of students and getting credit for that, right? And they can put that on their CVs, and that strengthens their case when they go out and look for their next opportunities. And so for all those reasons, we think growing and sustaining these workshops is important. And so it's our job to do that. Ed, can we go to the next one? So this is just an example of sort of how that might work. On the left-hand side of the slide, you see a series of landscapes. So Laura Stein, Haley Lanier, and Katie Marsky and colleagues were recently funded through the NSF's Biology Integration Institute program in the design phase. So they're designing a Biology Integration Institute around the idea of biogeography of behavior, right? And so there is a little bit of funding in that design phase to help support workshops, but you can also see how in the build out of that institute, connecting it to a workshop offering could be very impactful, right? Because at every level here, if we're talking about, sort of species range maps at the top level, or comparing location data in the middle levels, or dealing with the genetic or other molecular data sort of at the bottom levels, those all require coding skills that students would have to have and that students could learn through these workshops. And we could have high school and community college students who come and get exposure to those data sets and get intrigued by the science and then are recruited to OU for those reasons because they've been exposed to those ideas. So the specific plan would be for next year in 2021 to offer a similar sort of course through Zoom, just because we suspect that we probably can't do the in-person course as soon as next summer. This again would focus primarily on undergrads. Recruiting would be specific to the Oklahoma City area, tribal and community colleges, and trying to create relationships with Langston University, which is an HBCU here locally, right? And part of the idea and thinking on this is to try to use these workshops to increase sort of institutional relationships with these partnering minority serving institutions that could provide a great source of talent to the University of Oklahoma and our STEM workforce. Then for 2022 and going forward, we would like to have the courses on campus and expand to recruiting high school students from across the state, because we think that enabling and recruiting high school students and showing them a place and a pathway into the University of Oklahoma or into STEM professions is a place where we could have a big impact in the state of Oklahoma in particular. Next slide, Ed. And so overall, the long-term goals, right, are to focus on these three things, right? So funding. So directly following this, we're hoping to go to the Oklahoma EPSCoR office and try to get funding for workshops next summer. that would supplement the little bit of funding that we have now. We are planning to send proposals to the NSF iTest program, which is sort of for unique technical experiences for students and teachers. And then there's the Biology Integration Institute design proposal, the full proposal that will be developed over the next 2 years, led by Laura Stein. Logistically, things that we think are very important here are to strengthen the outreach to our target audience. And so this is about building these robust relationships with other institutions in the state. And part of that is trying to link this sort of STEM and computing training to the OU brand, so that people will see that students have earned the certificate at OU and know what that means, but they will also attract students to OU and help us with our recruiting of talent into the biological sciences is my particular interest, but of course across STEM disciplines and beyond, really. And I think this plugs into the OU strategic plan really nicely, right? So we know that the first pillar of the strategic plan is preparing students for a life of success. And there's a ton of data, and we showed a little bit of it in this presentation about how much impact it can have if students see themselves as being prepared to enter the technical workforce or see themselves as having a pathway into a STEM career. And so by creating that pathway, we can do a lot to help ensure that students have a life of success. Oklahoma is in high need for a modern technical workforce. We can just think about transition from a fossil fuel economy to a renewable energy economy, and we think about the skills that requires, and the number of people and the types of training programs that's going to require in STEM, right? And so for a state like Oklahoma that is heavily invested in fossil fuels, it's a critical need to start to broaden the technical capability of the STEM workforce to diversify the economy. And all of that feeds into this idea of strengthening our research mission through diversity, right? In order to become more diverse, we have to have an inclusive community. And we think that by building these aspects of the workshops and emphasizing those community aspects, that we can set ourselves apart as a place where students want to come and learn how to be STEM professionals. And so we think that all of those things would make this a good program to grow and continue and to increase its impact. And so now it's up to us to do the work, and we're hopeful that the seed funding that the VPRP has provided will help us grow this into something that's a long-term success at the University of Oklahoma. I think that's all I have, and we'd be happy to answer any questions people have at this point. And I think the way this works is you can put questions in the chat or somehow raise your hand.
You can submit your questions via the Q&A box at the bottom. Looks like we have our first question.
Thank you, Michelle.
Is there anything the rest of us can do to help? We are going to need a lot more volunteers next year. This year, we worked with Miami, and about half the instructors and TAs were from Miami University. And so if we want to do a more OU-centric one or expand on the OU side, we're going to need more instructors, help developing curricula, help advertising. That's all specifically for the workshop. But I guess, yeah, I think mostly support in that kind of regard would be the best.
I guess the only thing I would say is that if you are writing a proposal that maybe would like build up on the workshop, you might get in touch with Ed or with SICK and see if you can create a collaboration there that would help support the workshops.
If they're interested in becoming involved in the workshop, you can email myself or Jeff, or there's also the STEM Inclusion Council. Millen's the current president. I'm sure if you emailed him, he would like definitely get the information out. But yeah, there's a couple places. There's also, this year there's CompSci 2020 at Gmail, but that's not a good idea. Me, Jeff, or Millen. Classes that we didn't offer this summer that we plan on offering next year. So I think there's one in Excel that I think would be really valuable, because Excel is kind of, it involves some coding and programming languages, or it's kind of a language in and of itself. And that kind of skill set is valuable pretty much anywhere. There are always going to be a need for the R and Python courses. And so those were, I think, instructed by some OU folks, but the curricula were designed a lot on the Miami side. So having OU design curricula for those courses would be good. And then there's also a bunch of more topical niche things that would be good. So the Miami faculty and instructors, they are a lot of evolutionary biologists. And I think one of the strengths of OU's department is sort of the ecology aspect. And we also have a lot of good evolutionary biologists, but I think some more things that our faculty specialize in. Coding skills, what other skills are necessary for students to be successful?
Ed, I would jump in just quickly with this, and that there are a lot of skills that we think students need to be successful. I think, you know, in sort of science communication is one that comes up sort of right away. I think the emphasis on coding is from our perception that as students enter STEM careers, that there's almost an expectation that they know how to do this, or they've learned it somewhere. That isn't always true. And so that's, I think, why we focus on coding specifically at this point. There are a lot of other skills that students need to be successful. We felt like this one was a gap between what curricula were offering for STEM focused students and what the sort of expectations were in their other courses. I don't know, Ed, if you want to follow on that.
No, I think that's a pretty good summary. I mean, a lot of students, you know, I entered into biology because I liked animals, and a lot of the courses that I took in high school and college were about the principles behind it, but I wasn't really taught many statistics, and I wasn't really taught any coding. And so when you get into anything past undergraduate, where you're all of a sudden expected to understand how to code or how to use these programs, but no one's taught you how to do it, it leads to this feeling of, I can't do this anymore, and I want to switch to something I'm better at. And so, yeah, coding is going to be important. I think statistics is another skill that students may not have already, and understanding how to interpret data, especially in STEM. I think interpreting data and being able to think critically about it is another area that students could use more preparation in, but that might be beyond the scope of what we can teach in a week-long workshop. There's another question about graduate student instructors and what they found most valuable and whether it impacted the view of themselves. So we didn't actually poll the graduate student instructors. We didn't send any surveys to them. We thought about it after we got IRB approval, but I think it would be great to find that out. And I think that anybody who instructed was able to put instructor of record on their CV, especially if they came up with the curricula themselves, because they were instructing a course in coding. And then, yeah, I guess it's hard for me to say. I can say as someone that helped organizing, interacting with the students was really valuable and rewarding. But in terms of, also impacts themselves or their career choices, we did have graduate students follow up and make contacts. But the one I'm thinking of was actually with the EPA. So this graduate student is able to make a connection in the EPA and get advice on how to go into a government position like that. So if we get more graduate students involved in that career mixer at the end, it's going to be beneficial for them as well. Provide grants or scholarships to underrepresented students to purchase new technology to code on their own. At Miami University last year, they actually were able to give away 2 Raspberry Pis to students as like a raffle in the end. Stuff like that does take money, right? So yes, in a way we could use it to provide some technology for that. But I think the first thing that we need to focus on is a Raspberry Pi is a small computer. That's a good question. It's a computer and it's like very user-friendly. The first thing we need to do is get students in these workshops, and that accessibility aspect of it will take a significant amount of resources, because if students aren't providing the money to take these courses, we need to provide it for them. And so I think, Jeff, if you have anything more to add on that.
Yeah, I just agree that accessibility, I think, is the key there. And if we can know what infrastructure we need to make the learning accessible, then I think we can go out to people with money and ask for that infrastructure. I think that's a thing that if people are clear that, if donors are clear that we have a need that's preventing students from accessing skills that are really important to them, I think I would expect that's a need we can fill, but we would need some sort of data that would be evidence that like this is a barrier.
Seems like that's all the questions so far.
Yeah, thanks everybody. If there's no more questions, that's fine. Yeah, feel free to get in touch with me or with Ed or any of the other co-PIs about the projects. We'd be happy to talk about them, and also happy to learn about other things that are going on that might be related.